A 19-year-old village girl, who once changed the course of the Hundred Years' War, was now sitting in chains inside an English prison. She was locked to a wooden block surrounded by the same soldiers she had once defeated. This was the girl who helped crown a king. But now, powerful men were ready to destroy her. They didn't want people to believe she was sent by God. They wanted to prove she was a heretic, someone who deserved to be burned alive. On May 23, 1430, Burgundian forces captured Joan at Compiègne. She quickly became the most valuable prisoner in all of France. A few months later, in November, the English paid 10,000 francs to take her from the Burgundians. They moved her to Rouen, the main center of English power in France. By December, Joan was locked inside a strong fortress under the control of the Earl of Warwick. The English knew something important. If they could break Joan, they could also destroy King Charles VII's claim to the throne, and soon her harsh interrogation by English clergy would begin. Joan's interrogation by English clergy. On January 3, 1431, Joan was officially accused of religious crimes. Her trial wasn't run by a fair court. It was controlled by church officials loyal to the English. The main judge was Bishop Pierre Cauchon, a man closely connected to the English side. The charges against her were serious. They said she wore men's clothes against the Bible, claimed to hear messages from God, and refused to obey the church. But this trial was about something bigger. They wanted to decide if her victories were truly from God or if she was a dangerous heretic. On February 21, 1431, the questioning began. Joan was brought into a chapel, facing 42 church officials ready to judge her. She agreed to speak truthfully, but she made one thing clear: she would not say anything that could harm King Charles VII. Over the next month, she went through many long and exhausting interrogation sessions. The questions kept coming again and again, focused on three things: her visions, her refusal to submit to the church, and her choice to wear men's clothes. But this wasn't a normal questioning. It was a trap. The judges tried to twist her words so that no matter what she said, she would look guilty. One of their most dangerous questions was, "Do you believe you are in God's grace?" If she said yes, it would go against church teaching. If she said no, it would mean her visions were not from God. Joan understood the trap instantly. She calmly replied, "If I am not in God's grace, I pray He puts me there. And if I am, I pray He keeps me there." Even her enemies couldn't find a fault in that answer. At first, there were around 70 accusations against her, but over time they were reduced to 12. And something unexpected started happening. Some of the judges began to feel uncomfortable. They could see that Joan wasn't confused or dangerous. She was smart, calm, and strong. One member of the court even left, saying this trial was not about truth, but about trapping her. Another dared to question Bishop Cauchon's authority and was immediately thrown into prison. This wasn't justice anymore. It was a setup. Imprisonment in a male military jail. While the trial was going on, Joan was kept in conditions that completely broke church rules. According to the law at that time, a woman accused of heresy should be held in a church prison guarded by women, usually nuns. But that didn't happen. Joan was locked inside a military prison controlled by English soldiers, the same men who saw her as their enemy. She was chained to a heavy wooden block, even inside her own cell. Sometimes iron chains were locked around her feet, and the worst part, she was never alone. Guards stayed inside her cell all the time. Reports later said there were 3 soldiers inside with her, and 2 more standing outside. No privacy, no rest, no safety. These guards didn't just watch her, they harassed her constantly. They mocked her, insulted her, and made her life miserable. Some witnesses later said she lived in constant fear. At one point, Joan became very sick. She had a high fever and believed she might die. She begged to receive her last religious rites and asked to be buried in sacred ground. But even this simple request was denied. The Earl of Warwick did step in slightly to control the guards, but not out of kindness. The English had paid a huge amount of money for Joan, and they wanted to make sure she stayed alive long enough to be publicly condemned. But the danger she faced was even worse than insults. Years later, during a retrial, witnesses revealed something disturbing. Joan faced serious physical threats in prison. One powerful English lord even tried to assault her. This explains something important. Joan refused to wear women's clothes, even though it was one of the charges against her. Instead, she kept wearing men's clothing, not as rebellion, but as protection. Her clothes were tightly tied and secured, making it harder for anyone to harm her. She clearly told the judges that dressing like this made her feel safer around male guards. But they ignored her completely. Because this trial was never about truth. Even the legal process was full of problems. She was questioned for weeks before the official charges were even read to her. She was never given a lawyer. The trial didn't even happen in her home region, which was against church law. And later evidence suggests that parts of the trial records were changed to make her look more guilty than she really was. Everything was being controlled, everything was planned, and it was all leading to one final outcome, her execution. The heresy verdict and execution at Rouen on May 23, 1431, Joan was brought before the court for what would be one of the final moments of her trial. There was no real debate left. The decision had already been made behind closed doors. The judges told her that theologians from the University of Paris had carefully reviewed her case, and their conclusion was firm. Her voices were not from God, but from demons. Her choice to wear men's clothing was labeled unnatural and sinful, and her refusal to fully obey the church made her a dangerous heretic. The warning was direct: accept your mistakes, deny everything, or be burned alive. The next day, Joan was taken to the cemetery and shown the actual stake where her execution would take place. Standing there, weak from months of imprisonment, completely alone, and knowing death was just moments away, she was overwhelmed. For the first time, the fear broke her resistance. She agreed to sign a confession, admitting that her visions were false and that she had misled people. This moment is important because it shows just how much pressure she was under. This wasn't a free decision, it was survival. Because of this confession, her punishment was reduced to life imprisonment instead of death. She was also ordered to stop wearing men's clothing and return to women's dress, which she agreed to. But this so-called mercy didn't last long. Within just a few days, when the judges came back to her cell, they found her once again wearing men's clothing. This immediately raised alarm. Joan said she chose to wear it again because her voices had returned and told her she had done wrong by denying the truth. But years later, witnesses revealed a much darker version of what actually happened. They testified that the guards had taken away her women's clothes during the night and left her with no choice but to wear men's clothing again. In a prison full of male soldiers, where she was constantly at risk, this decision was not rebellion, it was protection. Still, the court ignored all of this. They called it a relapse, meaning she had returned to her so-called crimes after confessing. Under church law, this was the worst possible outcome. A relapsed heretic could not be forgiven again. This gave them the legal excuse they needed to end her life. On May 29th, the judges made their final decision: Joan of Arc would be executed. The next morning, May 30th, 1431, she was allowed to receive the sacraments, a small act of mercy that technically broke the very laws the court claimed to follow. Then she was taken from her cell and led through the streets of Rouen to the old marketplace. A large crowd had gathered, curious, silent, and watching. In the center stood a tall wooden pillar prepared for her execution. Joan was tied to it tightly. Before the fire was lit, she made one final request. She asked for a cross. An English soldier, moved by her situation, quickly made a small cross using 2 sticks and handed it to her. She held it close to her chest and kissed it. Then a larger crucifix was brought from a nearby church and held in front of her face so she could see it clearly even as the flames rose. Then the fire was lit. The flames slowly climbed higher, the smoke thickened, and the heat became unbearable. Witnesses later said Joan kept calling out the name of Jesus again and again, even as the fire surrounded her. Her voice didn't carry anger, it carried faith. Her final word, heard above the roar of the flames, was Jesus. At just 19 years old, Joan of Arc died in the marketplace of Rouen. But even in death, the fear she created in her enemies was clear. Her body was burned again and then again until nothing was left. The remains were reduced completely, and her ashes were thrown into the Seine River so that no one could collect them or turn them into symbols. The English believed they had erased her story completely. No grave, no remains, no legacy, but they were wrong. Over time, the truth began to surface. In 1456, a new trial was ordered after a request from her family. This time, over 100 witnesses came forward. Soldiers, officials, and even people involved in the original trial spoke out. They revealed the pressure, the manipulation, the unfair treatment, and the clear bias that shaped her condemnation. The final judgment of this retrial was clear. Joan's original trial was invalid. It was full of errors, injustice, and political motives. She was officially declared innocent, and then, centuries later, in 1920, the Catholic Church declared her a saint. Think about that for a second. The same system that once called her a heretic and burned her alive later honored her as holy. Joan of Arc didn't just die that day. She became a symbol of courage, faith, and standing strong even when the entire system is against you. And if you enjoyed this story and want more powerful, real history like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel.